Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today, we continue following the intense and emotional journey filled with tears and hope between CEO James and LyTuDiep. In the previous episode, while Diep remained missing without a trace, Trang, the woman who had always dreamed of being by James's side, kept trying every possible way to get close to him. However, James, unwavering in his loyalty and love for Diep, rejected her advances time and again. At the same time, CEO Hung, James's close friend and silent supporter in the search for Diep, suddenly brought news of a promising lead regarding her whereabouts. And in today's episode, a brand new character makes an appearance, Officer Lee. When he accidentally came across the missing person poster James had posted, he was stunned to recognize the familiar face. It was Hoa, the woman he had once rescued in the past. But is she really Diep? Without hesitation, Officer Lee contacted James to share this crucial piece of information. This news came like a ray of hope piercing through the darkness, lighting up James's heart with a mix of joy and anxious anticipation. He had never given up believing that Diep was still alive, and now, perhaps he is only one step away from finding her. So, could this lead from Officer Lee truly bring James to where Diep is? After all the time apart, can the misunderstandings and pain finally be healed? Will they find each other again and move forward together toward their final haven of happiness? All will begin to unfold in today's episode, a journey of faith, perseverance, and a love that never fades. Stay with me through the entire video so you won't miss a single emotional moment. After receiving news from CEO Hung about a woman who closely resembled Diep spotted in a remote countryside village, James was jolted out of his despair. Without hesitation, he jumped in his car and sped off into the night. His heart pounded wildly, filled with hope, anxiety, and a deep, gnawing fear. If it truly was Diep, would she be safe? Would she recognize him? But if it wasn't her, then where else could he possibly look? The journey was long, tense, and filled with worry, but James finally arrived at the location he had been told about. Yet the moment he stood before the woman, he froze. That face. At first glance, it looked just like Diep. But with a closer look, his heart shattered. It wasn't her. Though the woman shared a resemblance, she was a complete stranger. She didn't even know who James was. He stood still, eyes reddened, heart heavy. The hope that had carried him here was extinguished like a small flame snuffed out by a merciless wind. Once again, a lead he clung to had disappeared. He no longer knew how many more roads he would have to travel, how many more traces he would have to chase, before he could finally find Diep, the woman he loved more than life itself. As James sat dazed in his car, his phone suddenly rang. It was the housekeeper, her voice panicked. "Mr. James. Your mother, she fainted. Her face looks terrible. The doctor is on the way, but it's not looking good." James turned pale. He immediately started the car and rushed back home, his mind in chaos. Raindrops began to fall lightly on the windshield, but they could not wash away the surge of guilt rising inside him. When he arrived, he saw his mother lying in bed, her face pale and gaunt, almost lifeless. Each breath was so faint, it seemed like a mere breeze could carry her away. James was speechless. He knelt beside her bed, clutching the frail hand that had once raised him. A crushing wave of guilt engulfed him. "Mom. I'm so sorry," he choked out, voice breaking. "I've been so caught up in searching for Diep, then drowned myself in work, I forgot about you. You've always been there, supporting me, waiting for me, and I didn't stop, not even once, to notice you were fading day by day." James immediately called for the best doctor he could find. After examination, the diagnosis was clear: his mother was suffering from severe physical and emotional exhaustion. Her aging body had grown too weak to fight back. She would need a long period of absolute rest and careful care, both medically and emotionally. From that moment on, James didn't leave her side. He held her hand, his eyes shimmering with tears yet filled with determination. "Mom, from now on, I'll be here with you more. I promise you, I won't stop. I will find Diep. I'll bring her home to you, so you'll see that your sacrifices weren't in vain. So you won't have to worry or be sad anymore. I'm sorry for letting you feel so alone, but I won't let that happen again." The small room fell into silence, filled only with the steady beep of the heart monitor and the soft sound of rain falling outside the window. In that moment, James realized, there are people who wait for us quietly, who love us unconditionally. And sometimes, while we're out searching for what was lost, we must not forget to cherish those who have always stayed by our side, sacrificing silently for us every single day. As for Diep, she was still wandering alone, silently making her way through rugged mountains and dense forests. No one knew exactly how many days and nights she had been drifting through the wilderness. All they could be sure of was this: not once had she given up. Not once had she allowed herself to collapse. Diep was not as fragile as her delicate appearance suggested. She knew all too well, if she took the main roads, if she stopped in populated areas, she could probably find her way back sooner, but she would also be far more likely to be discovered by those who wanted her gone forever. Instead, she chose a safer path, longer, harsher, but hidden from most. She maneuvered through narrow trails, stayed far from villages, and took shelter in secluded forest edges. Each morning, she checked the direction of the rising sun, recalibrated her path, and continued on. Though exhaustion crept into every muscle, though her feet were swollen from days of endless walking, she refused to stop. Because in her heart, a familiar voice echoed, James's voice. "James is waiting for me. I know he's still looking. As long as I'm alive, I must make it back." That evening, after covering a long stretch of rough terrain, Diep stopped at a clearing amidst the thinning forest. Under the soft moonlight filtering through the leaves, she used a small handmade knife to carve a few branches and set up a makeshift tent. She started a fire using flint stones, gathering dry straw and fallen twigs along the way to warm herself in the crisp night air. Her dinner consisted of several wild berries, carefully chosen and double-checked from her past survival training in the woods. She also picked some leaves to boil into tea, both to quench her thirst and restore her strength. Every move she made was deliberate and precise, because she knew even the smallest mistake could break her before she ever saw the man she loved again. As she sat by the fire, a quiet resilience burned in her eyes, but behind it lay a longing so deep it could not be hidden. She gently touched the chain around her neck, a small necklace James had gifted her on their last birthday together. The cold metal against her skin sent a shiver down her spine, a jolt straight to her heart, stirring memories and promises left unfinished. "I've come more than halfway. Just a little farther now. James, don't let go. I'm on my way back to you." Though her eyes stung with fatigue and her body cried for rest, Diep did not sleep just yet. She stayed alert, listening carefully to every sound, the rustle of leaves, the howl of distant animals, the shifting winds. These survival skills were not just tools, they were armor, shielding her as she marched forward without fear. She told herself, "As long as I can breathe, as long as I can walk, I won't stop. I will make it back to him. I will prove that our love cannot be buried by any force. Even if I must cross the deepest forests and the highest mountains, I will return." In the darkness of the wilderness, the firelight flickered in her determined eyes. And somewhere out there, James's heart, too, seemed to beat in sync, reaching out, silently calling to the steady, unwavering steps Diep was taking to come back to him. That day, Officer Lee was on an assignment completely unrelated to James or Diep. He had been deployed undercover to investigate a major case, a cross-border gambling ring operating quietly in the area near where James lived. With his cautious approach and seasoned instincts, Lee decided to gather intel in his own way, not by revealing his identity, but by discreetly stopping by local tea houses, small convenience stores, and roadside stalls, places where locals tended to gather and gossip. All morning, he spoke with numerous people, trying to piece together clues about the suspected group. But what Lee didn't expect was that today's investigation would lead him down an entirely different path. As he walked past an old bus stop at the foot of a mountain, where a few community posters and old advertisements flapped in the wind, his eyes suddenly locked on a half-torn missing person notice, its corner fluttering in the breeze. He stepped closer. The image on the paper made his heart skip a beat. It was her. Hoa. The girl he had once rescued not long ago, during a surprise patrol deep in the northern forest, when he found her collapsed from exhaustion, face full of panic and bruises, yet her eyes still shone with an inexplicable resilience. At the time, she could only utter one word, her name, Hoa. She had said nothing more. With no record of her identity or family, Officer Lee had no choice but to hand her over to the nearest medical center for care. Later, she quietly disappeared without a trace, leaving behind a lingering question in his mind. And now, he had the answer. Beneath the photo was a bold line of text. If anyone sees this woman, please contact. Without hesitation, Lee pulled out his phone and dialed the number. But as soon as the line connected, a familiar voice on the other end made him freeze. Hello, this is James. James? CEO James? Lee was stunned. He could hardly believe it, the girl he'd once helped was the very person James had been searching for all this time. Without delay, Lee responded urgently. James, it's me, Lee. You need to come see me right away. I believe I have important information about the person you're looking for, it's Diep. Meanwhile, James had just finished settling his mother back into rest after her treatment when his phone rang. Seeing Lee's name on the screen, his trusted friend and a reliable police officer, he picked up immediately. But the moment he heard the words, "I have news about Diep," his heart lost all composure. Without asking anything further, James dropped everything. Company documents, high-level meetings, even plans for a major new project, all of it was set aside in an instant. His mind now had room for only one thing: he had to get to Officer Lee, right away. As he drove, his heart pounded uncontrollably. Was this finally a real lead? Or would it just be another round of hope, only to be shattered? But this time felt different. This was Lee, a man who didn't use the word important unless he had solid grounds to believe in it. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, James kept his eyes fixed ahead, the wind rushing through the open window, unable to calm the storm rising within him. Diep, are you really nearby? As soon as he arrived at the meeting place, James quickly stepped into the small cafe, where Officer Lee was waiting in a quiet corner. Seeing James, Lee stood up and nodded in greeting, though a serious expression still lingered on his face. You got here fast, Lee said in a low but clear voice. I didn't want to waste a single second if you really have news about her, James replied, his eyes filled with hope. They sat down. Without any small talk, Lee began recounting the story. About a month ago, during a mission to apprehend a smuggling ring near the northern mountain border, I came across a young woman collapsed on the edge of the forest. She was covered in dust, her legs scraped, face pale and worn, but her eyes were resolute. I took her to the nearest medical outpost for first aid. Since the hospital was far and she didn't have any papers, I brought her to stay at my place for a few days. Hearing this, James clenched his fists. His heart nearly stopped when Lee pulled out his phone, scrolling to an old photo he had taken of the girl to ask for information, and there it was, the face James had longed to see day and night. James whispered, almost breathless. "That's her. That's Diep. She's the one I've been searching for, the woman I love." Lee blinked in shock. "Wait, she told me her name was Hoa." "I remember clearly, Hoa, not Diep." James immediately understood. She was probably afraid someone was chasing her. Diep is extremely cautious, especially when she's on the run or in danger. Lee nodded slowly, as if putting together every missing piece. James leaned forward, urgently. "When did she leave? Did she leave any clue? Did she say where she was going?" Lee shook his head regretfully. "She left while I was tied up with the case. I wasn't home. The housekeeper told me she said she felt better, thanked everyone, and mentioned she was going home. But no one knows exactly where she meant. She left quietly, without leaving anything behind." James lowered his head, his chest tightening once more. Another lead, lost to silence. But this time it was different. Even though he still didn't know where she was, now he knew with certainty, Diep was alive, and she was safe. And to him, that was worth more than any clue. James stood up and bowed slightly in gratitude. "Thank you, Lee. Thank you for saving her. Because of you, I can keep believing that she's still out there, still alive, and maybe even on her way back to me." Lee placed a firm hand on his friend's shoulder, reassuring. "I'll keep helping you. If I hear anything more, I'll let you know right away. Trust me, she's a fighter." James nodded, then turned and walked away, his tall frame steady, but his eyes deep and quiet, carrying an unshakable promise. "Wherever you are, Diep, I will find you. And this time, I won't let you go again." As for Officer Lee, after hearing James confirm that the woman named Hoa was indeed Diep, the woman he had been desperately searching for all these months, he could no longer hide his surprise. Though a seasoned police officer, Lee was also a man of deep compassion. And in that moment, he quickly realized this wasn't just a case of mistaken identity, it was a pivotal piece of a profound love story, one that fate had led through heartbreaking twists and turns. He began recalling every glance, every subtle gesture Diep had made during the days she stayed in his home. She hadn't spoken much, but her silence, her caution in every step and every word, he now understood it wasn't simple shyness. It was the guardedness of someone on the run, someone haunted yet fiercely holding on to survival. Lee knew he couldn't remain a bystander. That very night, he contacted his most trusted team, officers he relied on without question, and assigned them a new mission, to quietly search the surrounding areas near his home, where Diep had once been seen. He instructed them with utmost care. No noise. No leaks. If she's truly trying to find her way back, our job is to protect her from whatever danger she's avoiding. A small, elite search unit was quickly assembled, composed of those most skilled in terrain navigation, wilderness survival, and investigative work. They immediately began combing the most remote zones, hidden trails, abandoned forest shelters, and makeshift rest stops often used by locals passing through. Every small clue, every scrap of paper, every footprint, every local who might have seen someone pass by, was documented with care and precision. After leaving the cafe where he met Officer Lee, James drove through the night to Diep's old house, the place that had once held so many precious memories between them. In his heart, there was still a fragile thread of hope. What if she had already returned, quietly, just as she had once vanished? The car stopped at the gate. The moon hung high above, casting a soft silver glow over the moss-covered stone steps. The night breeze gently nudged the half-closed door, producing an eerie creaking sound that seemed to whisper the truth: no one had come back yet. James stepped out, heart pounding. He pushed open the iron gate with a faint click, walked through the old garden strewn with fallen leaves, and paused at the front door. His hand trembled as he slipped in a key, the key Diep had once given him as a symbol of trust. The door opened. No one was there. The house was pitch black, silent to the point of suffocation. No lights. No warmth. Everything remained exactly as it had been the day she left, cold, empty, and layered with the dust of time. James stood still in the middle of the living room. He looked around, the picture frame still rested untouched on the table, the scarf she always used still hung by the window. The objects remained, but the person hadn't returned. A wave of emptiness rose in his chest. All the hope sparked by Lee's news now faded in this hollow space. But this time, James refused to fall apart. He took a deep breath. He knew Diep was alive. And if, as the housekeeper had said, she was on her way back home, then maybe, just maybe, she was retracing familiar paths, step by step, heading toward him, as he was toward her. James clenched his fists, his gaze firm with renewed resolve. Tomorrow. I'll go find you. Not blindly like before, but with purpose, starting from here to Lee's place, following the path you once walked. I believe we will meet again, as long as you're still walking toward me. After so many long, painful days of searching, James finally had a real, solid lead, thanks to Officer Lee. He now knew Diep was alive, and that she had once been much closer than he ever imagined. But, would that be enough to bring them back together? Could James find Diep among endless forests and shadowed trails? Would their hearts, constantly reaching for each other, be enough to overcome all danger, all misunderstandings, and once again join as one? And would Officer Lee, the man who unknowingly became the bridge of fate, be able to help Diep return safely into James's arms? All of this remains unknown. But one thing is certain, their love has never died. As long as there is hope, James will never stop. Will they reunite? Or will fate cause them to pass by one another once more, only to be left with bittersweet regret? Stay tuned for the next gripping episode, airing tomorrow. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss this destined reunion.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người. Hôm nay thì mình vừa mới hoàn thành xong video Lý Tự Diệp. Mọi người cũng có thể biết là kênh mình thì làm dạng review thôi, thì kênh chính cũng đã ra video, thì hôm nay mình sẽ ra video review cho mọi người xem, và mình cũng sẽ cung cấp thêm một chút về câu chuyện để cho câu chuyện hay và đặc sắc hơn. Và mình hy vọng rằng mọi người có thể ủng hộ và xem kênh mình nhiều hơn để kênh mình ngày càng phát triển hơn. Và kênh mình thì nó cũng mới bắt đầu làm từ cách đây không lâu thôi, nên cũng còn rất là nhiều thiếu sót. Mình cũng mong nhận được sự ủng hộ và góp ý từ mọi người. Hy vọng rằng mọi người có thể yêu quý và ủng hộ cho kênh mình nhiều hơn, cũng như là đóng góp những ý kiến để kênh càng ngày càng hoàn thiện hơn, để có thể sắp tới thì sẽ mang đến video hay hơn và có ý nghĩa hơn cho mọi người. Và nếu như mà mọi người yêu quý kênh mình thì mọi người hãy like, share video để ủng hộ kênh mình và làm động lực cho mình ra video nhiều hơn. Và nhớ là hãy đăng ký kênh, sau đó bật chuông thông báo để không bỏ lỡ bất kỳ video nào mọi người nhé.